Hey guys, we are fastly approaching the end of Unit 6, so I just wanted to take a quick second to go over the most common mistakes I've seen made. We did ask you to take home your quizzes this weekend and look at those mistakes that you made and make corrections. It is not for credit, but it's really a resource that you should do for yourself. So I wanted to take the time and do the same and show you some of the most common mistakes we've made. So the subjects or the topics that we've covered so far are Pythagorean's theorem, and I'm going to leave it as that. The distance formula, and again, this is shorthand. Distance formula, special right triangles. So we're going to call this special. Equations with cube roots. So we're going to call that cube roots and square roots. And then we have volume. So I just want to take you through the most common mistakes I've seen. So in Pythagorean theorem, the question will ask you and say a 13-foot ladder is leaning up against a 12-foot wall. And a lot of you will label here because you assume you're given the legs. Well, you have to read the entire question. The very first thing you do when given a right triangle in Pythagorean theorem is decide what information it's given you and what information it's asking you to solve for. So if it's a 13-foot ladder leaning up against a 12-foot wall and it asks you how far away it is, you have A and you have C and you need to solve for B. And we know you can either set that up as A squared plus B squared equals C squared and then subtract A squared from each side. Or we know algebraically that is the same thing as B squared equals C squared minus A squared. All right. So also when you are working with Pythagorean theorem, make sure that once you solve for this, you also root each side. A lot of people will tell me that it's B squared equals 144. Okay, great. But I wanted to know what B was, and that's 12. Okay. So those are the most common mistakes in the Pythagorean theorem. So let's talk about distance formula. Pardon me, as I find a whiteboard. All right, so the most common mistakes with distance formula is either a lot of you wrote on the paper where I asked you specifically to give me the distance formula. A lot of you wrote this. Well, there's a massive thing missing here. We have to have our squares. But then you did it correctly. So I just want to make sure that we're connecting that those squares go there. So when you're given a problem with negative numbers, the most common mistake I saw was that we did not know how to subtract our negatives. So when we're given 4 minus a negative 1, that equals 4 plus 1, which is 5. The most common answer I got there was 3. So just watch your negatives when you're subtracting because it does get a little dicey there. And that was really the only problem I saw in distance formula. So special right triangles, I'm not really going to worry too much about. Honestly, there's a whole video on it on here. And Mr. Beater told us there's only going to be 2 questions on the assessment, and they're going to be really almost spoon-fed to you. So just really be mindful of those rules. Look over the notes before you come in. I think that one's going to be really easy. Now, the equations, cube root and square root equations. The biggest mistake I saw on the quiz, as we all discussed, was number 5, where you had 2x squared equals 36, and we went ahead and square rooted that, and then we ended up with somehow 2x equals 6, which algebraically doesn't work because the square root of 2x squared is x root 2, not 2x. So don't get scared if it asks you for the root of 18. Like, that's okay. It's an improper root, or excuse me, it's not a perfect square, and that's okay. We know how to simplify squares. That's why we taught that to you before. So don't get scared if it does this. The second most common mistake also on that problem and continuing in that section was the plus minus. So if it gives you something like x squared equals 81, and you physically have to draw that square root to isolate that x by itself, then it's plus or minus 9. It is not if it gives you x equals 81. That is a true root. So that is going to be 9, because that's what you've learned since you started learning cubes. This is the square root of 81 is 9. So be very careful about that. Now, the cube roots, if you draw a 3 in front of that, or if it's x to the third, that is not plus minus at all. That is not plus minus at all, because a -3 times a -3 times a -3 is not the same thing as +3 times +3 times +3. So watch your cubes. Do not add plus minus on cubes, and notice where you're drawing the actual square for the plus minuses. And follow your procedural steps. You have to get the weirdo out of your car before you can be alone. All right, volume. Now, we just learned volume on Friday, but I'm going to tell you the most common mistake and that I make constantly is forgetting units. That'll kill you in high school, is you have to remember your units cubed, because otherwise it's an incomplete answer. That's really going to be the one thing that's going to trip you up. Remember, exact includes pi. Estimate is rounded, and it will tell you to what decimal place it would like. So remember your units, remember what exact means, and read the instructions. I think you guys are going to kill it. So I have a little challenge question here for you. And if you turn in these answers to me with the password burger, you will get a piece of candy. Or maybe a little treat. We'll see what's up. Here you go. So you can pause the video. And this is your challenge homework, because it's a long break. This is not required. It's challenge. And if you watch the videos, these should be super duper simple.